Hey guys, Matt here with Freitag Builders, and today we're going to be talking about installing Schluter Ditra over plywood, getting our laundry room here ready for tile. And I'm going to go over all the steps it takes and the materials that you're going to need to properly install this Schluter Ditra before your tile for the best results. First thing we're going to talk about today is the tools and products you're going to need to install the Ditra. So you're going to need your rolls of Ditra. You're going to need an unmodified mortar to go underneath here on the plywood, and you will have a modified mortar that goes on the top, but that's for later. You're going to need your Schluter Ditra trowel, which is 11/64 by 11/64 square notch is one of the ones they recommend to install the mortar. You're going to need your mixing paddle. You will need a drill of some sort. I'm going to use this rigid cordless drill today. You can use more of a mixing drill if you have larger products to do. And you're also going to need 3 buckets, one for water to mix with your thinset, one for water that you can sponge the floor off, and one to actually mix your thinset. You're going to need a sponge that you can wipe the floor down with, which I'll be showing in a moment. And I use a grout float to go over the Ditra and push it down into the thinset. Okay, after you have all your tools and supplies ready, the first thing you're going to want to do is prep the floor. You're going to want to make sure there's no dirt and debris, any sheetrock mud or anything from the pre-construction. You're going to want to scrape that up, vacuum the floor, and I go over this lightly with a sponge just to get up all the final dust off of there. Step 2, after prepping your floor, is you're going to want to dry fit your Ditra. I've already got this piece dry fit here. So next we'll roll out this other one. You're just going to roll it out in here to dry fit it, and I forgot to mention, but you will need a razor knife to cut your Ditra to dry fit in here before you mortar it down. All right, once you complete the second step of getting your Schluter Ditra dry fit in the area that you're going to install it, then you can get your bucket and start mixing your thinset, which I'm about to show you next. Step 3 is mixing your thinset mortar in preparation to install the Schluter Ditra. First, I'm going to pour some water in the bottom of here for ease of mixing. Then I'm going to dump about 50% of this bag, maybe a little less, in the bucket. Now the manufacturer's instructions recommend mixing this 2 to 3 minutes, and after mixing, allow to set for 10 minutes before remixing and then your application. I like to mix the thinset just a little bit wetter than you would mix when setting your tile for better adhesion to the felt backer of the Schluter Ditra. All right, guys, now that I've mixed this for 2 or 3 minutes, I'm gonna let it set for 10 minutes before remixing. And also the reason why it would be better for you to have 3 buckets instead of 2 is so that you have a wet bucket to put your mixing paddle in to clean that off in between mixing from project to project. All right, now I've let my thinset set here for around 10 minutes, and I'm gonna do a small remix before applying it. All right, step 4 is going to be actually putting the thinset on here to applicate the Schluter Ditra to the subfloor. Here's where your sponge comes into play. You're going to want to take your clean water and your sponge, and you're going to want to lightly go over this floor and moisten it. You don't want any puddles on here. You're just going to moisten it to keep that thinset from drying out so quickly. It's best, if you're new at this, to work in small sections so that you don't get overwhelmed. You can just roll the Ditra back, do your thinset, and roll it out on there and float it out with your grout float. And then move on to the next little section. Okay, now that we've got that floor good and moist, now I'm going to want to actually applicate the mortar directly on the subfloor. I'm going to use my Schluter Ditra trowel here. It's 11/64 inch by 11/64 inch square notch trowel. Use the smooth side first to press this in and make sure you have good adhesion on your wood subfloor before you switch over to your notched trowel side and pull your notches in here. When you are doing your notches and pulling it this way, you want to make sure that you run all of the lines or grooves in one direction. This is very important under your tile too. This eliminates air pockets and allows for the tile and the Ditra to press down in the mortar and for better adhesion. All right, now that I have my modified mortar troweled out on the floor, I'm going to take this Ditra and lay it back on there and unroll it. And I'm going to use this grout float to put pressure on it and roll it from the middle out to the edges and press it down good for best adhesion in this thinset mortar. This is one of the most important steps, guys, is making sure that you get this evenly pressed down and all smoothed out with no humps or bubbles. Now we're ready to move on to this last and final piece, and our Schluter Ditra will be installed and ready to dry out before we come back and lay the tile over top of it. I'm going to show you this method once again, but on this piece, I'm going to pop it out from under the base door casing here. And I'm just going to roll it back about halfway, and we're just going to do a small section. I'm going to roll that over, press it in good, and then we'll roll that back and we'll do that section. And that is how I would probably recommend the beginner to do this. That way you're working with a smaller space here, and you don't have to worry about setup time and your mortar skimming over. Again, I'm going to start out with my wet sponge and moisten this subfloor just a little bit. You don't want any water puddles, standing water. You don't want to do that. You just want to lightly mop over it with your sponge just to gently wet this subfloor here. Now I'm gonna apply some of this. I usually grab some out with a trowel. Make me a little pile here in the middle to work with. Like I showed you on the first piece, you want to use the flat side of your trowel first and give this a good skim coat to press it into the subfloor really well before you go back and run your square notch trowel into it to make your grooves. Just another quick tip, when you're running your grooves in here, you don't want to run your trowel down low like this. If you run your trowel down low, it's going to press those grooves down and you're not going to get the full 11/64 height on that groove and the amount of material under there that is recommended by Schluter. So you want to raise this thing on up toward a vertical motion as you're going across there. It is challenging to do. It definitely wears out my wrist. I have this section all troweled out, so I'm going to roll this Ditra back out on here. Get it laid out exactly where it goes. And I'm going to start right here on this end, that I'm going to roll that back up and I'm going to press it out this way toward the door. I'm pretty much putting as much weight as I can get on here. I only weigh about 170 pounds, so I'm putting as much as that as I can get on here that's not on my knees and pressing that out this way. That way I can bed this down into that modified mortar as best I can. Okay, now that we've got that section down, I'm going to grab this, pull it out from under this door casing, and I'm going to gently roll it back. It's kind of going to want to get tied over here under this little sheetrock edge, but I'll just pull it at an angle. And I'm going to want to pull it back just a little bit extra there. I'm going to set my grout float right here on the back of it to hold it down. We're going to go through the steps one more time. I'm going to take my damp sponge. I'm going to sponge off the subfloor here. I know I'm being repetitive, but some people need to hear the repetitive voice so that they don't have to rewind the video. That way I know that I've taught y'all how to do this multiple times in one video. Now I've got my subfloor moist. We don't want it wet, no puddles, just moist. Real wet to the touch. You wouldn't want to set your shirt down on there. You're going to get it wet. So a little bit more than damp, but not soaking wet. All right, let's pull our thin set over here. I'm going to pile me some out here like I did last time. You don't have to do it that way. That's just the way that I've been doing it for the last 10, 15 years. We're going to use the square side of the trowel again, set it into the subfloor really good, get good coverage before we move to the other side. All right, now we're going to move to the notch side. You want to keep this up as high as you can get it to get better ridges. All right, now we've got this all trod out. We're just gonna lightly roll this back in here. Gotta bend the edges just a little bit to get it back under this door casing. And don't worry about the extra mortar that you get coming out here. As soon as I get this bedded down well, I can take the flat side of my trowel and come across there and gently pull that back and smooth it out, or I can take my sponge and wipe it up. We're gonna have hardwood laying there, so as long as it's a smooth surface, it will roll right over that. I'm gonna get my grout float again. Put all my weight that I can on here. And push the air and the bubbles and push that mortar and everything directly out to the door right here. And you'll see a little bit squeeze out right here. I don't know if you can see that at the camera angle, but that's what's happening. And that is how you properly install Schluter Ditra.